Hello again. Modern humans have been present in both Africa and other parts of the world for well over 100,000 years. To begin with, people both in Africa and the parts of the world colonised by those who left that continent relied simply on fairly crude stone weapons and tools. Over the course of tens of thousands of years, some of those areas colonised by humans made enormous progress. They invented writing, for instance. This happened in Central America, China, and the Middle East. Around the same time, the wheel was also invented in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Thus began the march towards civilization, the smelting of metal, buildings with more than one story, ocean-going vessels, and so on. But not, of course, in Africa. The only place where these things were seen there was in coastal areas which came into contact with civilizations in Europe and the Middle East. In North Africa, for instance, first the Phoenicians from what is now Lebanon, then the Romans, followed by the Arabs from the Middle East, brought change to the coast there, which in some cases spread inwards a little towards Central Africa. The same thing happened in ancient Egypt, where the culture was, of course, connected and heavily affected by that of the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East. And then too, in what is now Eritrea and Ethiopia, the kingdom of Aksum arose from contact with the Sabaeans of the Arabian Peninsula. That's why Semitic languages are spoken now in Eritrea and Ethiopia, because of the influence from the Arabian Peninsula. In all those parts of Africa, writing is seen, but not in the rest of the continent, which was left to itself. Indeed, when Europeans began penetrating the interior of Africa in the 18th and 19th centuries, they found people living in much the same way that they had in Europe during the Stone Age. No wheels, the most sophisticated method of transport being the dugout canoe, and people living in mud huts. All this is indisputably true and not really worth debating. The question which springs to mind is why? Why should this have been the case? What was it about Africa which kept it as a cultural backwater where no progress was made? Why should it be that when Europeans arrived in parts of the interior, they came from a civilization which had steam engines, telegraphs, printing presses, and cameras, and yet the people whom they encountered hadn't noticeably progressed since humans left Africa 100,000 years earlier? I'm open-minded about this, and I'm also aware that it lays me open to the charge of racism. However, a more useful way of tackling the matter would be for those who view such questions as being racist simply to provide their own explanation. On the coastal areas of North Africa, in Egypt and in Eritrea, where Africa was exposed to European and Middle Eastern civilization, progress was made. In areas which had no contact with Europe or the Middle East, it was not. Why should this have been the case? It is, of course, true that in one part of southern Africa, at Great Zimbabwe, some extensive dry stone walling was undertaken, but the people there still lived in mud huts and didn't develop writing or anything else which we would recognise as civilization. So I don't think that that is an exception to this general rule which I'm positing.